Hours here at the high school cafeteria in Swift Current, Saskatchewan.
Grilled cheese and tomato?
I'd get papers in the mail to be filled out, and I wouldn't be able to fill them out, so they didn't get filled out. And that would cause me to get in trouble sometimes with government, like doing income tax or paying bills. I was never able to figure out that I had to pay a bill at a certain time of the month, and if it wasn't paid at that time of the month, then there was interest on it. I would have panic attacks in grocery stores when people would get, if I had a cart in front of me or somebody behind me when I was trying to find what it was on the shelf that I wanted.
What is so shocking about Linda Richards' story is how common her story is.
40% was mortifying for lots of observers.
At Statistics Canada, for years Scott Murray crunched numbers on illiteracy and administered 2 major international surveys. Canada's numbers are shameful when you look at the 2 worst categories. 15% can't understand the writing on simple medicine labels, such as on an aspirin bottle, where a parent, for example, would not be able to determine the dangers for their own children. And an additional 27% of Canadians can't figure out simple information, a hazardous material sheet, for example, warning of dangers in the workplace, such as risks to the eyes and skin. So, 42% of Canadians are semi-illiterate, and the numbers are even worse for those in middle age. You heard that number right, 42%. And if you think it's because of immigrants, well, think again. Even when they're excluded, the numbers remain pretty much the same, and in 15 years, they've scarcely changed at all. And there's proof of real-life impact.
The economic costs and the social costs are large enough that we should be ashamed. I think that was what I would, the term I'd use, that we haven't made the investments in our own citizens. You can kill someone with a bow and arrow still, but it's an awful lot easier with a laser-guided weapon. Literacy is the laser-guided weapon for the 21st century.
Linda Richards was light years away from laser beams.
Most of my life up until, I left home, I had teachers tell me that I would never amount to anything and that I would never learn. My father did that as well. I never thought that anything good could happen for me.
Linda has had a tragic life. 2 of her children died in infancy through illness, and struggling on as a single mother with her remaining daughter, she also battled alcoholism. It was only the boozy fog of her addiction that made the shame of her illiteracy bearable.
When I was drinking and drugging, it was easier for me to say what it was that I needed. And when I was sober, it was really hard for me to go and ask for help.
Linda's daughter, Shauna, sensed something was definitely wrong with Mom.
Probably one of the saddest things, because she would, I guess when she was a child, there was more or less nursery rhymes, and she could memorize those. So that is what I got.
For a while, Shauna could play along with her mother's pretending to read those nursery rhymes, but then she just let loose.
She was taking me to a karate lesson, and I introduced her to my sensei. And there was probably a few times like this, and I didn't mean it hurtfully, like I really didn't, because I didn't know, but I introduced her as my stupid mother.
Linda Richards was around 40, and finally realizing her life was at a dead end, decided to go back to school, not knowing she was trapped. She was in the exact age group with the worst standing in illiteracy.
If people want to get into adult upgrading programs, generally they have to meet a certain level before they can be admitted to those programs.
Nada Veeman was until recently the head of the Saskatchewan Literacy Network. Her research revealed the system is rigged against those most in need of help.
If somebody wants, for example, they didn't succeed in getting their high school education when they were going to school, they decide later they've got kids, they want to get a further education, they will have to pass a pretest typically to get into an upgrading program. So that means that people who have, the most skills tend to get into those programs and have the most access to training allowances and so on.
So the paradox is, in Canada, if you're critically illiterate like Linda Richards, you can't pass the tests to get into literacy training. It's as if hospitals kept out the critically ill and admitted only the not so ill. Canada's federal setup creates built-in snags, a patchwork of competing programs with different priorities, and with adult education falling through the cracks. One result of federal-provincial squabbling is underfunding. So when Linda Richards finally made it into an adult education college, she was faced with underpaid or volunteer teachers who encouraged her to simply give up.
It was after I started having difficulties and I wasn't getting my studies as fast as what they thought I should and be out of the system, you know, as fast as what they said. That's when the teachers started saying, you know, that I should quit, I should go back to working in a restaurant or doing stuff that I needed to do, that I did before. And there was no shame in that. And I was very angry.
So here's the system that's supposed to be helping you turn your life around, and the people you're dealing with are saying, get out of the system.
Yeah, yeah.
I always thought I was stupid. I wasn't as smart as the others.
Over in Sweden, in the town of Västerås, Sabina Ekström's story sounds much like Linda's. Sounds that way at first, anyway.
Yes, I did a lot of cheating. During gym, when we did orienteering, I would follow one girl who read the maps because I wasn't able to. When we took dictation in class, I would usually copy from someone. When we had drawing, someone would draw for me.
Sweden is sort of a Canada on the Baltic, a liberal democracy with a vast network of social services. In a UN index which ranks quality of life, Canada and Sweden are tied in 5th place. But in one vital area, literacy, the Swedes have beat us cold. Those surveys that Scott Murray invented that measure functional illiteracy put Canada, remember, at 14.6% and put Sweden at 7.5%, first place in the world. Native Eamon spent a year discovering what the Swedes are doing right.
There were municipal adult education programs offered in 288 municipalities across the country, and that was a program that was taught by professional teachers. There also was a priority given to people with the least education. And I think the other thing that I see as very important is the fact that the Swedish policy somehow helps to sustain literacy skills beyond the school and formal learning.
Simply put, the Swedes see learning as not just something you do in your early years, it's a lifelong pursuit that never ends. Now, both countries have their illiterates. The difference is what happens to those who fall through the cracks. In the literacy stakes, Sweden trounces Canada at every age level. But for the middle-aged, it's truly grim. In Canada, about half have low literacy skills. In Sweden, it's just 15%. Remember Linda Richards back in Saskatchewan, living on the edge of poverty, unable to get educators to help her go back to school? Well, Sabina Ekström also worked for rock-bottom wages in the food industry, but what happened to her was quite different.
It's the government who pays. I received a subsidy. Without it, I wouldn't have been able to enroll. In Sweden, it's also your right to get a leave of absence to go back to school. You have at least a year to study and improve your education without losing your job.
And for Linda Richards, there were those literacy course tests designed to keep her out. In Sweden, the idea is to get you in.
I went to the manpower office and asked them to help me. They said, "You might have dyslexia. Do you want to be tested? And then we can see what you should study and what direction your career should take." That's how it began. The teachers here are very approachable. You get lots of help and you don't feel different. You get inspired by the teachers, encouraged by them. Their attitude is, "Of course you can. There's no problem."
The no-problem Swedish attitude to literacy and reading are part of the culture here. You see the results everywhere. More than 60% of Swedes use public libraries. In Canada, less than 40%. In Sweden, almost everyone follows current events. In Canada, less than 80%.
To build the VP's issue profile, I'm wondering if there's some policy area the administration could give them.
TV can be part of the war on illiteracy. What's popular television in one country is also likely to be a hit in the other. But in Sweden, television is part of what fuels the country's drive to literacy. There is no translation dubbed in for foreign TV programs. Viewers are forced to read or they're lost.
Without literacy, you don't read. Without literacy, there is no real democracy, I would say. You cannot be a part of a modern society if you can't read.
Swedes trounce us with both their literacy numbers and at the cabinet table. Education is so important here, there are 3 education ministers. Lena Hallengren is one of them. In Sweden, she boasts, if you're illiterate, they just won't give up on you.
You always get a second chance, and a third chance, and a fourth chance. It's never too late, and if you miss the chance for some reason, maybe you had different kind of problems, which is not that unusual. If you're 16, 17, you make wrong choices or whatever, you get a new chance.
Ooh.
For Sabina Ekström, who's in her 40s, her second chance means not having to go back to her old supermarket job when she finishes her studies.
För ungefär 3 år sedan.
I was very bored with my job. I wanted to do something else. I felt I had to know more things, have more computer skills, learn more English. I thought, okay, I'll have to get back to school again. Now it feels like the world has opened up a lot more.
I'll play Crazy 8 because I'll win.
You think you'll win?
I know.
Back in Swift Current, Linda Richards struggled to open up her world. But it wasn't the system that turned her life around. It was her daughter, Shauna, who gave her the will.
Well, good thing we're not keeping score. I was still going to school at the time, and she asked me if it was weird. And I said no, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, you know. I'm going to school with my mom.
When I did start school, we used to sit at the table and we'd do our homework together. If I had a bad day, she would say to me, "Mom, you can do it. You know, this is just a bad day today, you can do it."
And do it she did. In a triumph of grit and downright heroism, Linda got her grade 11 diploma. And then, for her, an even greater honor, a certificate of a chemical dependency counselor. And for you, it must have been a moment of immense pride in yourself.
Oh, I was so proud that my daughter was there at the graduation, and I was very proud of myself. I did it. I did it.
Back at the high school cafeteria, well, she still puts in long hours here, but she's no longer the cook. She's the boss. She's become a successful businesswoman, bought it out, and is now the owner.
Literacy has given me back my life, well, gave me a life that I never had. Chester Raccoon stood at the edge of the forest and cried.
No one calls Linda Richards stupid anymore, and she no longer has to pretend to read nursery rhymes. She now rejoices in a universe of words with her grandchildren. A Linda Richards in Sweden would not be remarkable. There, she'd have had a second chance, and a third, and a fourth, too. But a successful Linda Richards in Canada is a rarity. She did get a second chance. Most never do. For CBC News, I'm Dan Bjarnason in Swift Current, Saskatchewan.
And that's News in Review. I'm Carla Robinson. Thanks for watching.